Howdy, folks. My name is Owen Brand.
And I'm Katie Cadaver.
And we are co-hosts of the VHS Vault podcast, where old is new and cringe is king. We are a podcast dedicated to bringing you old and obscure movies from deep in the vault.
That's right. You can listen to us on Spotify, Amazon Music, and on Planet Rage Radio Thursdays at 8 p.m. Central on the Live 365 app. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube.
And email us at vhsvaultpodcast@gmail.com.
The Shameless Picture Show is part of the Cinepunks Network. If you like the Shameless Picture Show and you want to hear other great shows like it, make sure you check out the Cinepunks Network. You can find them at www.cinepunks.com. That's CINEPUNX. There's other great shows such as Cinepunks. There's The Carnage Report, Cinema Smorgasbord, Fat Girl Hacks, Loud, Fast, Philly, Tomb of Ideas, and Twitch of the Death Nerve, and so much more. If you like punk rock and you like movies, make sure to go to www.cinepunks.com. And let's not forget the sponsors for the Cinepunks Network. We have the Lehigh Valley Apparel Creations. They are the premier screen printer of the Lehigh Valley with service to the whole country, professional and personable in a way that only a DIY business can be. They also have ridiculously low prices for whatever your screen printing needs may be. You can visit them online at xlvacx.com. That's xlvacx.com. Lehigh Valley Apparel Creations. We also have the Essex Coffee Roasters. All their coffee is roasted to order. They have high quality beans, bunch of apparel, and tea available. They are bringing high quality coffee to the masses without the pretentiousness. Use the code Cinepunks for 10% off your first order. You can visit them at www.essexcoffeeroasters.com. That's ESSEX, coffeeroasters.com. Once again, use the code Cinepunks for 10% off your first order.
Big shout out to the band Crossed Keys for lending us that awesome fucking music during our little ad. That song is called Who We Never Were. You can buy that single currently off of Bandcamp. The band is called Crossed Keys. It will be on their full-length album, Believes in You. That song was lent to me by Crossed Keys, specifically, I don't know if he goes by Joey Angel or goes by Joshua Alvarez, but I met him as Joshua Alvarez. He's the co-host of Cinepunks, our fucking network, and I told him, I love this song, I want to use it, so that way people don't have to listen to me talk, and he said, fuck yeah. So please, if you like the song is called Who We Never Were. You can get that on Bandcamp currently. Off of their album Believes in You. You can get the 10 song LP is out May 5th, Friday, May 5th. You can actually order it on vinyl right now, so go show them some love.
This episode is also brought to you by Paramount Pictures. Paramount Pictures is a legendary producer and global distributor of filmed entertainment since 1912. Paramount Pictures' library consists of more than 1,000 film titles, with rights to an additional 2,500, featuring films by Hollywood's most respected filmmakers, including Martin Scorsese, J.J. Abrams, and Michael Bay, among others. Paramount Pictures' library consists of more than 1,000 films, including such classics as Star Trek, Godfather, and Indiana Jones franchises. Academy Award winners Braveheart, Forrest Gump, and Titanic, and current favorites such as the Mission Impossible and Transformers franchises. Paramount Pictures distributes its titles on DVD and Blu-ray through Paramount Home Entertainment. We are happy to have them. We fucking love Paramount Pictures.
This movie podcast actually discusses movies. Be aware that it may discuss any of the following elements: endings, surprise twists, unexpected cameos, and all manner of spoilers. If this doesn't appeal to you, why listen to a movie podcast? Without further ado, please enjoy our feature presentation, The Shameless Picture Show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Shameless Picture Show. I am Michael Viers, and with me today is a pretty good friend of mine. We've known each other for a long time at this point. I don't even remember exactly where we met, but today I'm joined on the podcast with Drew Britton. Drew Britton, for those of you who are not familiar, is originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He is a filmmaker. He directs, he produces, he writes. He's done such things such as the films They Want Me Gone, Back of the Staircase, and When the King Tilts, as well as a myriad of short films. I first met you back, I think, in school, like right after school. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I'm pretty confident we met each other either in school or right after school in one of the productions we were both helping on. And since then, you've been continuing your career as a filmmaker with your love for both horror films and art house cinema, and kind of bringing those two worlds together. And correct me if I'm wrong, aren't you also teaching now?
Yeah, so I'm a professor at a university in Southern Illinois, EIU, where I teach a number of film studies courses as well as production-based courses.
Perfect. I'm trying to remember. Do you remember where we met?
Yes, I do. So yeah, it was shortly after we graduated, and we were working on the set of the Milwaukee production, The Surface, and that was in the summer.
Gotcha.
I was in the summer of 2013. So yeah, I had graduated shortly before that, and I think
you were doing transportation on that film, weren't you?
Yeah, I was part of I was one of the production coordinators, and I was in the transportation department. So yeah, in between undergrad and grad school, I was working on sets, and that was one of the sets I was working on. And so that's where I'm sure we had kind of heard of or had known each other, or had crossed paths at that point. But I remember specifically talking to you about horror and just being like, oh, hey, blah, blah, blah. And because I think you had finished your short film, your thesis film from undergrad. And so you and I were talking a lot about that. And
didn't you also help at least a little bit on my short film, Love You Still? Didn't you help procure a boat?
No, I was doing the boats for The Surface.
Okay, I could have, because those films shot so close to each other too that I kind of got them a little mixed up. But yeah, I definitely remember you working on The Surface, and yeah, we definitely bonded over horror, because while horror is one of the biggest genres on the planet, it's still looked down upon, especially when you're working on some of these productions where, you know, some personalities are just take themselves a little too seriously and such. Right. It's just it's definitely something that bonds people together. I don't even remember how we found out each other liked horror, unless you knew my film, and then we just started talking from there.
Yeah, well, I had approached you because I had seen, or at least had heard of at that time, From the Darkness Theater, and knew it was more so horror adjacent and had a lot of just, you know, aesthetically speaking, a lot of horror infused into it. And that's what I thought was cool about it. It wasn't overtly horror. It was more so just like taking kind of the themes and kind of the spirit of horror, and then infusing that into like this kind of very heady, dark, kind of emotional drama.
Well, I appreciate that you liked it. But yeah, and since then, like I don't know, you're one of those, you're like almost sometimes my favorite type of friend, where we don't talk to each other on a super regular basis, but whenever we do, we always have something interesting to talk about with each other. Because we're both busy people. You're teaching, and but like it almost feels like we just continue. We pick up conversations every couple months and just continue it on.
Yeah, or it's just like, oh, I know Mike would be into this film. I'm gonna shoot him a text, see if he's seen this, or what have you. Especially when it's horror related, or it's so fun when you do let kind of like the thoughts collect over the months, and then once you do hang out, it's like, oh, you've got all this stuff to talk about, you know, as opposed to, you know, significant other or a friend you do see every day, where you can just, you know.
Yeah, I think you're legitimately one of those friends that I don't think we've very rarely ever had conversations about our personal life. It's always just so like, you know, movie and topic based but it never feels like, it's always a very rich conversation.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Which is why I wanted to have you on this episode, because I've not had you on the show since I think season 2 or 3, where we were making a list of our favorite like slow burn horror films.
Oh yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, that was a number of years ago.
Yes. Funny enough, it was. So the reason I've been trying to track down guests is because very much like when you were on last time, my co-host had to take a hiatus from the podcast, and no one wants to listen just to me talk for an hour and a half. So I thought, well, let's get some of my, who I think, interesting friends on and have them pick movies that they want to discuss. And that's what I did here. I kind of had a list of movies, and you chose which one you had the most interest in.
Yeah, ironically enough, not a horror film.
Nope.
And yeah, but I have a lot of affection for this film, and specifically for the trio we had talked about, Cassavetes and Falk and Elaine May. And so immediately upon seeing that film in the list, I was like, oh, that's the one I want to talk about.
Perfect.
Because funny enough, even though this isn't directed by Cassavetes, if I was getting into his films and you hadn't told me that he did not direct this, I would have been probably a little shocked, because this feels like it's directly out of his.
Oh yeah, it reminds me of like something like Killing of a Chinese Bookie or something.
That would be. I was just thinking of that. I was like, oh, that would be a great double feature as well, with another longtime collaborator, Ben Gazzara.
Yeah, I love that movie. So normally I usually like craft a description for the film along with historical context and whatnot. But if you listen to the beginning of the podcast, you'll know that I ran out of time because I chose to go see Indiana Jones instead last night. So instead, I'm actually just going to read the description from the Criterion Collection, because they do a nice job of summing the film up, and then we'll talk about the everything else afterwards. So the description says, Elaine May crafted a gangster film like no other in the nocturnal odyssey Mikey and Nicky, capitalizing on the chemistry between frequent collaborators John Cassavetes and Peter Falk by casting them together as small-time mobsters whose lifelong relationship has turned sour. Set over the course of one night, this restless drama finds Nicky, played by Cassavetes, holed up in a hotel after the boss he stole money from puts a hit out on him. Terrified, he calls on Mikey, played by Peter Falk, the one person he thinks can save him. Scripted to match the live wire energy of its stars, alongside supporting players Ned Beatty, Joyce Van Patten, and Carol Grace. Inspired by real-life characters from May's own childhood, this unbridled portrait of male friendship turned tragic is an unsung masterpiece of American cinema.
Peter Falk is Mikey.
I got a terrific suggestion for you, Nick. I suggest you find somebody you can trust.
John Cassavetes is Nicky.
They're gonna kill me, Nick. They're gonna kill me.
Mikey and Nicky. On a night like this, there are no rules.
You give me that in 30 seconds, you hear me, or I'll kill you. I'm gonna die. You're not gonna die.
What do you think they're planning? To shoot you in a movie house?
Mikey and Nicky.
I'm really getting the treatment tonight. Tonight's my night.
On a night like this, there is no trust.
They're gonna kill me. Honey, I'm serious now.
Well, I'm not interested. I'm coming with you.
There is no time.
I know it for a fact they're gonna kill me.
You are not gonna die.
On a night like this, there is no choice. Peter Falk, John Cassavetes, Mikey and Nicky. Written and directed by Elaine May.
Ma, if anything happens to me, Mikey did it.
So the way, as I said before, the way this podcast came to be was when I realized I had a bunch of episodes to fill out. I started just going through and being like, what movies have I been wanting to see, and for whatever reason kept putting off. And then I would reach out to people who I knew I'd want on the show and be like, do you have an idea for a movie? If not, here's what I have. And you saw the list, and out of everything I had on there, you chose Mikey and Nicky. You were actually the only person who chose Mikey and Nicky. So that is especially a reason I thought you were a perfect choice for this. As I said, this was my first time seeing this movie.
Oh, okay.
What's your relationship with this movie?
So you and I had talked about a little bit earlier, like I've followed Cassavetes for a number of years, and I got really into him around 2013. So I just went through his entire filmography, essentially starting from the beginning with Shadows and getting into his more studio work like Too Late Blues and Child is Waiting. And then once I got into Faces and Husbands, that's when I really started to fall in love with his stuff, and A Woman Under the Influence. So in conjunction with that, obviously I wanted to look into a number of his films in which he was just an actor. And in terms of like his backstory, a lot of what he did was essentially would act in these films that he really had no emotional connection to. But a lot of what were big films, like he was in The Dirty Dozen in 1967, and he was in Rosemary's Baby in 1968. And it's funny watching those because in contrast to the work that he directs, they're so dissimilar. When I came across Mikey and Nicky and I saw that Peter Falk was also in that, I was like, oh, I absolutely have to see it. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I was shocked that he didn't direct it because it very much feels like a Cassavetes directed film, not to negate the worth of Elaine May, because she's obviously brilliant in her own right. And there's so many great kind of funny little quirky stories about her and the collaboration that she had with the two guys on set. And just how they interacted with each other and the relationships that they had with one another. And so when I saw that film, I really fell in love with it because of that Cassavetes sensibility, also Peter Falk, and the fact that it really did feel like a film that he had directed, regardless that he did not direct it. And we were saying this pairs really, really well with like Killing of a Chinese Bookie. And I know you could say that just because of the kind of mob-like element to it. But if you removed that from Mikey and Nicky, I would love the film just as much. Honestly, the stuff that probably speaks to me the least in the film are the scenes where we're dealing with the more kind of crime-laden material, like when we're dealing with Ned Beatty's character, Kinney, and he's kind of in the car, or when they're having the meetings about how to track down Nicky. That stuff isn't as interesting to me as the material when we're just with Mikey and Nicky. And when they're talking about the material that really has nothing to do with the film, in particular, the graveyard scene is just, it's such a heavy hitting scene, and there's so much to unpack with this film. And I showed this actually in my film communication class. And
how did it go over?
What's that?
How did it go over?
Good. It was pretty divisive, or polarizing, as I like to say. Some of the students really, really liked it. The students who loved it were the ones that gravitate more towards character and don't really care about plot. And one of my students specifically said, she was like, one of the most important things to me in film are characters. She was like, so the fact that it was light on plot, like I loved the fact that we could just hang out with these people. And then the students who were more interested in plot and kind of the action oriented, stories, it just didn't really speak to them.
Yeah, like for me, like this is in what, like I said, I had you on seasons ago to talk about slow burn. This in its own way, like while there's always things happening, it's a slow burn in that it's a slow burn gangster film in that it takes a while for that element of the story to unfold. Like there's always things happening, but it takes its time for you to kind of really figure out what the stakes are and to figure out what is happening at any given time, where each person's allegiances fall, and for all of this to unfold. But ultimately it's just so gripping because of the characters. And actually, funny enough, I had to point this out since you said you went through a complete marathon of Cassavetes' work, which I need to do at some point. And we were talking earlier about big, horror franchises. There is a connection between Cassavetes and a big horror franchise. Mm-hmm.
In terms of his acting?
No, just in general, like a small little tidbit. In Halloween Kills, they're watching Minnie and what was it? Minnie and
Moskowitz. Yes,
Minnie and Moskowitz, which I just think is hilarious. That in a big budget Halloween film, they snuck a Cassavetes reference in.
Yeah, well, I remember watching Halloween Kills and I was shocked. But then if you dive a little bit deeper, David Gordon Green, who's the director of the Halloween franchise, comes from a very, very independent background.
Oh, definitely.
And I've listened to his commentaries, and he's actually talked about Cassavetes before. And especially if you watch his early films like George Washington and All the Real Girls, they also have very much that kind of Cassavetes-like sensibility where it's all about character. It's all about
Definitely
what's going on with the people involved as opposed to what is the plot per se. Which, I mean, that opens a whole other can of worms because, I think he's a really wonderful director.
Yeah, I'm still... So with me, when it comes to a filmmaker that I really like, I actually sometimes struggle to marathon their films because I like having like little pockets of their filmography to discover.
Okay.
So like I know I've seen Killing of a Chinese Bookie. I believe I've seen A Woman Under the Influence, and I've seen Husbands, but that one was a long time ago. But he's one of those. He's kind of an exception where, especially after, we will talk about Elaine May, who actually directed this film, but she owes a lot in terms of the style of this to Cassavetes. But especially after watching this film, I was like, man, I would love to. Now I really just want to go through his filmography in order and experience them instead of kind of just picking and choosing throughout and just kind of seeing his growth as a filmmaker. Because what I found so fascinating about this, so Mikey and Nicky came out in 1976, but Elaine May had planned this film for like 10 years prior. She kind of had, she at least had the script planned out. Now, whether or not she intended to shoot it the way she did, that I can't speak to, but it is fascinating to me that this type of filmmaking and with the circles that Elaine May ran in was just in the zeitgeist enough that, like, I truly believe that she would have made this movie this way, whether Cassavetes was in it or not, because that is the way that I truly felt she wanted to make this film.
Yeah, and I think, classic case of the stars align is because I'm sure she was influenced by him, and I'm sure she definitely would have had that kind of aura to the film. Regardless of the fact that he's not in the film, I'm sure that style and that influence, and very much in doing the research and just reading about her, is like she was opposed to the studio system, and they had some problems in post-production because the studio was demanding, the film, and she just in very much a Cassavetes-like fashion, she was going against the grain, going against the man, and doing it her way. And I obviously applaud her for that, regardless of the fact that they ran into studio problems. But they shot over 1 million feet of film, so I can't imagine the editing hurdles that they had, which is just unreal. Let alone editing that much digitally, but doing it by hand, which would have had to have been done that way back in 1976, is just unreal.
I would love, because one thing I love about Elaine May too is at the point that this was made, she was only the third woman to ever be invited to the Directors Guild. And one thing that I feel like a lot of people sometimes forget about the job of a director is, because nowadays with low budget filmmaking being what it is, and you can go out with a relatively inexpensive camera, you can write a script, you can go and shoot a movie right now. I feel like a lot of people forget sometimes the role of the director before everything else is to get a performance.
Right.
And with her background in acting and improvisation, I would love to see what her shooting script looked like versus what it ended up being.
Yeah,
because with actors like as good as fuck as Cassavetes and Peter Falk, I imagine there was so much that was just being found in the moment, and especially with the style of acting that I don't remember which school of acting both Cassavetes and Falk came from, but hell, they had Sanford Meisner in the fucking movie. So for any of you acting nerds out there, like I would just love to see the way that this was built, because like this movie, very much like Cassavetes films, it just feels like from the acting to the shooting to the editing, it's just improvisation, it's jazz, it's just finding it.
Yeah. So one of the really interesting misconceptions about Cassavetes was, and I can certainly see it, and I thought this too, was like, oh, it's all improvised. But he was very, very very much into writing these scripts. And so even something like Faces, which people consider like the best improvisational film of all time, like he had like a 200-page script for that film. And Peter Falk was saying like he wrote everything, and he just had this way of writing that made it feel like it was improvisatory. And a lot of times what they would do, and this was also what I was kind of referring to when I was saying like, oh, so much of that influence and so much of that Cassavetes sensibility from his films had kind of carried over, was because they would also prepare and rehearse the same way that he would also do with Falk. And like they had done on, they had worked specifically on Husbands together, which was a Cassavetes directed film. So it was John Cassavetes, Peter Falk, and Ben Gazzara who were in that film.
It's a great
And what they did on that film and a lot of his other films, and what they certainly did on Mikey and Nicky, was, and in listening to the interview with Michael Hausman, who's the producer on Mikey and Nicky, said it was so frustrating is because the three of them would just sit in a room for all morning and just, they would rehearse and then rewrite the rehearsal, because they would improv during the rehearsals. And then they would simply just dictate that, rewrite the script according to what great lines they came up with during improvisation, and then rewrite it. And then that would essentially be their shooting script. So Michael Hausman was like, some days we would shoot before lunch. Some days we wouldn't get off a shot until after lunch. And so it's this way of just kind of finding it. And there's also some great, one of my favorite kind of anecdotes that I heard was that they were shooting the graveyard scene. And back in the day, when you shoot on film, you only get about 10 minutes per magazine. The magazines are the big things they put on top of the camera. And they were going through the scene, and said about minute 6, they just started improvising. So essentially they would start on script and then just kind of get away from the script eventually. And they knew they had run over 10 minutes, and he was still in the scene. And Cassavetes was like, I'm pretty positive, like there's no film left in that camera. And Elaine May had just said, no, I just love what you're doing. Just keep going. Just keep going. He's like, no, there's nothing to be shot. Like, why are we going to keep going? She was like, I don't want you to stop what you're doing. And I really love that. I mean, as silly as that sounds, it just goes to show like the love that she has for the craft, and like you're saying, for the performances. And that way of working is obviously not conducive to a studio, which are exactly the problems that like Michael Hausman had talked about. Because this was backed by a studio, unlike a lot of Cassavetes' work. And that's where he tended to find himself in the most, and Elaine May too, is when they were working under the confines of these studios. And so you can even read, Cassavetes is primarily known for, outside of his acting, like Rosemary's Baby, but he had a lot of problems with Polanski on that set, and just in terms of the way they worked together. And so he, as well as he did in terms of his performances, he really didn't like operating within the studio system. And he does have a few studio movies like Too Late Blues and A Child Is Waiting. And then he essentially just abandoned that and went back to doing it his own way. I believe he had owed the same amount of money on his house when he died from the point in which he took out his first mortgage. He just kept refinancing it and then using the money to pay for his own films, which is you would never think that for somebody who we consider to be an established, what feels like a Hollywood icon. But knowing like, oh, he's like actually a true independent at heart. And they all are.
Yeah. And I always really responded to that, because like I remember when I, in film school, like even though none of us had any money, I remember some professor who had worked in Hollywood one time said, like, oh, you don't put your own money into your films. Like, dude, we're students. We have no choice but to put our own money in this. But whatever. But then to hear that there are people who had really influential careers who just continue to back themselves. That I think that's so fucking inspirational. He knew he wanted to make what he wanted to make, and he would do bullshit work that he didn't care. Like people would view him as like, oh, he's a movie star or whatever. Those jobs he didn't want to do. That was the equivalent of him having a 9 to 5. That was the equivalent of him clocking in every day, doing something he didn't give a fuck about, so he can take his money and go make the shit he wanted to do.
Yeah. And it really is tragic in knowing that, yes, he's revered now, and there's, books and there's documentaries, and he's got his own Criterion box set. It's just, he would never have guessed. I mean, these films were not revered back then like they are today. A lot of these films were just written off. Like only a few of them really, really were impactful at the time. I know Faces had a couple Academy Awards, and A Woman Under the Influence had done really well, but a lot of his own films were bombs, which is really sad, because now if you look back, all of his films are extremely tight. Even within his studio films, you can definitely see a lot of his own voice inside those films that he's trying to get out, that may be kind of suppressed by the studio system, which is then why he goes back to doing it his own way.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's not to take away from Elaine May, because I think so much is owed to her in this film. And she, interestingly enough, she doesn't have a lot of credits to her kind of
she's written 4 films, directed 4 films, and it's, so this was the last film she did before she did Ishtar, which is the film that is often considered to be the film that ruined her career, which I think is unfair, because I think it's actually kind of a fun film, but that's beside the point. Female filmmakers, they got one chance. If they fucked it up, that's all they cared about. Yet, they'll keep giving other people chances upon chances. But like Elaine May, she was such a talent. Like she was an actor. She had a really successful partnership with Mike Nichols. And then she continued to write films, like thankfully, because her voice is like, she wrote Tootsie, she wrote Reds, she wrote she wrote the American adaptation of The Birdcage. And she had such a unique voice, and what I found so endearing about this film was the way that she portrayed male friendships, where in that she has almost a reverence for these characters. They're not good people. They're not, and she's not ever trying to soften them. Recently on this show, we watched Once Upon a Time in America. And that film, you have bad people doing bad things, but the movie has has the wrong type of reverence for them, where it's making them feel like good guys, even though they're doing fucked up shit. Elaine May is never one to turn away from these are bad people. They're not doing good things, but she still wants us to care about them, but know that they're in the wrong.
Yeah, she doesn't pass judgment on these characters, and the characters are who they are. And especially once you get into kind of the latter half of the second act, or even beginning of third act, when they go over to Nell's apartment, that's where it gets really rough. Yeah, some of those scenes or that scene in particular at Nell's apartment is really tough to watch. But again, it's just kind of like, and even the things they say, but it's the characters are who they are. And as much as and that was one of the difficult things amongst my students, is that how despicable these characters were. And, even when we're looking at Mikey's character, I think especially on this rewatch, there was so much that I took away that was just so heartbreaking in the things that he said. And if we're going to get into the film itself, and specifically what I'm just referencing, is what I really love is that the fact that Mikey is setting Nicky up in 98% of other films, that would be saved for a reveal in the latter half of the second, or at the beginning or end of the third act. It would be your eureka moment, like, oh my God, he set him up. So a lot of the film would be this, is he or isn't he? But we're introduced to Ned Beatty's character 20 minutes into the movie, and we know right off the bat that, oh, he is being set up by his friend. So witnessing and kind of experiencing the rest of the film and their interactions with that knowledge makes it so heartbreaking, and makes so many of the things that Mikey says hold so much weight, as opposed to having to go back and look at those things in retrospect and on a second view and be like, okay, I know these things now. So how do these things that he says and how does his behavior kind of play differently? But the fact that even on a first viewing, that if you knowing that 20 minutes in the movie, every subsequent scene feels so much more impactful because we know that. And again, the movie doesn't care about the plot per se. It is about the characters. And I love that it kind of just gets that out of the way. And anytime we cut to Ned Beatty's character, I'm just kind of like, okay, whatever. I want to get back to the characters. And the graveyard scene, there's no discussion of how are we going to get me out of town, but it's all about kind of their past and what they've been through and the history they have with one another. Every heavy subject that could be had between like two friends is talked about in this film. We talk about family. We talk about death. We talk about what happens after you die. Like every single conversation, heavy conversation that you could have with somebody, they go through it. And which is why this movie is so draining. It is extremely draining, emotionally speaking, because it's reflective and it makes you reflect on your own relationships you have with people. And there's so many lines that I wrote down specifically, and there's so many of those heartbreaking moments. And I'll definitely save it for later, but my Thrill House moment, I knew what it was right when it happened in the movie. And it was such a gut punch. But yeah, we'll get to that when we get to it.
Yeah. And you're right. This movie is draining, and it's a movie that it's so creative in that you're able to relate to the characters without having to relate to the characters, if that makes sense. You know, I don't relate to Mikey. I always do that. Mikey and Nicky because like, I don't relate to who they are as people. I'm a very different person than they are. I don't relate to what they do for work. I don't relate to having to, live in paranoia because I ripped someone off. But what I can relate to is I've definitely had friendships that should have ended a long time ago, and I've been unable to get myself out of. I've definitely been in friendships where the person who is supposed to be your friend is setting you up to look like a fool. Like the scene in the apartment where Cassavetes tells him like, oh, she, go give her a kiss. She's, this is what she does, knowing that that's not going to go over well. Yeah. And while I haven't been in that same situation, I've had friends do things to make me look bad, to make themselves look and feel better. So all of these moments were hitting. And then, like you said, we find out the reveal that Mikey is setting up Nicky really early on. And it's like Hitchcock's view of how to build suspense. Have you heard, for listeners who have not heard this analogy, Alfred Hitchcock says, to build suspense, if you have two people talking and a bomb goes off, that gives you one moment of fright. But if you establish that there's a bomb underneath the table and then two people are talking about baseball or whatever the fuck, it adds a lot more tension and suspense to what's going on because it adds new weight to everything they're doing. So knowing early on that Mikey is going to fuck over his friend really just adds more weight as they build upon the reason it's gotten to this point. And even the fact that Mikey is sharing these sentimental moments with Nicky where things were great and they have known each other. And I don't ever doubt for a moment that Mikey loves Nicky. He just can't have him in his life anymore. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought that up because I love that it's never like, okay, this is exactly what happened in the dealings that went wrong. It's just like, you know the basic plot points. And again, Elaine May is not interested in kind of the crime-like aspect to the film. It is all about the two characters. But what I feel like she made them criminals just so she can have that ending and for it not to be random as fuck. Right. And to kind of to counter all that kind of the mob-like element of the film is that all their conversations and everything that they talk about are situations that we could go through. And one of the examples that sticks out in my head, and it was such a heartbreaking story, is when I forgot the name of the third party's character, but it's when Mikey is talking about how he saw Nicky at a restaurant and he walked past him and Nicky said, get that guy back. I forgot to give him our order. And he's like, I said that joke for you. And he goes, no, you said it for the other guy. And I'm just like, oh, that is something that we could all experience. And like you were saying, that scene when they go to Nell's apartment, it's, you know, maybe we haven't been through that, but the idea of a friend trying to embarrass you, like we've all been through that. And it is those moments when you just and to kind of add to that, the moment that and you're just saying, how Nicky or Mikey essentially feels like, oh, this isn't somebody that I can have in my life anymore. And unfortunately, in their line of work and in the life that they subscribe to, that often leads to death, as opposed to just saying like, okay, I'm going to move away from this person, just not associate with them. But one of the most telling moments to me in the entire film, going off your point of why Mikey doesn't feel like Nicky can be in his life anymore, and when it really sets in for me, is after the watch debacle. And there's a moment after
that scene broke my heart for some reason. And they never established the sentimentality of that watch until it happened, but I felt it.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, Nicky's cracking jokes. He's like, oh, do you have the time? And he's like, my father gave me that watch. He goes, oh, well, you had it long enough. Mikey just starts shaking his head and he looks at him and he doesn't say it, but the look on his face to me just says, this is why I can't have you in my life anymore. Like, this is basically sums up all the reasons why I don't want to be around you anymore. But then at the same time, like, you get this feeling like he's going back and forth constantly about this decision that he's made. Did he make the right decision? And obviously that all culminates in that amazing last shot of him just staring.
Or the one that really got me was in the cemetery scene. And once again, we have the superior position. So we know what's going on when Nicky's just fucking around and he'd be like, you know, I'll tell my mom if anything happens to me, it's all Mikey's fault. And the way that Peter Falk delivers that line, he's not like, fuck you, Nicky. It's utter panic. Yeah. Because it's almost like a moment like, has he figured this out? You know, is him shouting this to everyone? Am I going to somehow get fingered for this? You know, it's the way that he delivers that is gut wrenching. And I also love that Nicky never responds to the way that he says it.
Right. Well, he says, so yeah, I know that scene spoke to me too. He says, yeah, if anything happens to me, Mikey did. And Mikey says, take that back, you son of a bitch, take that back. And that definitely can be read, like you're saying, in a couple different ways. Like, you can read it in one sense of him saying, like, you know, is he going to feel guilt? You know, is he going to be the one to blame for it? Yada, yada, yada. But also, to me, it was this idea of like, he doesn't want Nicky to know that, and that guilt of Nicky knowing that Mikey set him up is just too much for him to bear. And that's obviously what the whole ending is about. The fact that Nicky dies knowing that Mikey set him up, and then Mikey realizing that, and Mikey fighting the whole film of trying to not let Nicky in on this, and that back and forth that he has. So, like, you know, I think as much as kind of, you know, Nicky is like the kind of, he's just so bombastic, he's so flamboyant that you can't help but like kind of walk away from the film thinking about him more than you do Mikey, because he is the much more subdued character. But to me, Mikey's character has so much more to kind of pick apart and examine because of that guilt and because of that weight that he's carrying around about, okay, I'm setting up my best friend. But then you really, you know, he never says it, but there's so many things that he says and does that aren't direct that makes you realize, or at least in my interpretation, that he's second guessing. Even in that scene where it's him and Kinney, and I forgot the name of their boss, but they're in the office towards the end, and Kenny's like, okay, I'll just drive around the neighborhood. He's like, no, you can't. And he keeps telling him, like,
I love that scene.
He's like, you can't drive around my neighborhood. People are going to see you. He's like, okay, I'll drive around twice. And he's like, we've got patrol. And you're like, oh my God. He's like, he is starting to like really like, because it's getting to that moment. It's like, all right, this is it.
And then because he also knows too, you know, because he says that line, and it's like, well, how you know, how do we know Nicky's going to come to my house? He knows Nicky's going to come to his house.
Yeah.
He knows, and like just instantly, that he's going to come to his house.
Right. Yeah. And then even before that, I thought it was so interesting that the first time he gets in Kenny's car and they're going to talk, he keeps referring to Nicky as the guy. He never calls him Nicky. He keeps calling him the guy, almost as if to kind of take away from the fact that he's a person. It's almost like in that conversation that he's having with Kenny, it's like, oh, if he just refers to him as the guy, he just feels like another hit for them, right? As opposed to him referring to him by his first name and the fact that he is a friend. Trying to disassociate himself from that friendship and just say, okay, if I can give myself a little distance, maybe it won't be so hard, especially when I'm talking to, this person who's going to be responsible for ultimately.
Yeah. And it's interesting when Mikey got in the car with Kenny, which I'm kind of with you though. The whole subplot with Kenny is not my favorite. However, I do weirdly like the idea of, cause it's very counter trope in that, usually when you have a hitman or assassin in a movie like this, they have a really specific persona. It's, calm, cool, collected type of thing. This guy's just kind of a schlubby dude who is not very good at my favorite scene of him is when he's like in the car with Mikey and talking about, after food and lodging, I'm barely going to come out on this. It's a side of his work that is never seen, and I kind of love that. But when Mikey's in the car with him, I kept thinking, oh, is he gonna try, is he getting second thoughts? Is he gonna try to lead him the wrong direction? But he was actually very unhelpful throughout all of that, because Kenny was like, well, it'd be easier if I knew where we were going, and Mikey wasn't really giving him directions. They're just driving around aimlessly. So I couldn't tell. It's like, does he truly not know where Nicky's going? Is he stalling? Yeah. And I don't think he necessarily knew, but it wasn't until that scene that we just talked about later on where their boss is, telling Kenny to show up at Mikey's house, and he is stalling, that it becomes apparent that, oh shit, he feels on the fence about this. Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of that tension for me in the film doesn't necessarily come from, I was like, okay, is he going to are they going to cross paths with the hitman and whatnot? A lot of it's for me is watching Peter Falk and his character. He never says it out loud. And that is the most kind of blatant example we get of it, is when he is being very defiant of them kind of trolling his neighborhood. Just the anxiety that character is holding of just and we all have those moments where you're just trying to buy yourself more time, usually for something that's not nearly as dramatic. But when you're just I need to finish this, or okay, this person's waiting on me and I need to get here, or I need to do this. This is that to the nth degree. Mm-hmm. And Peter Falk is such an exceptional actor, and he can do all of that, and he can exude all that without having to say it and without saying it directly. I also love, because I hadn't thought about it, but I looked it up. He was shooting Columbo simultaneously with this, and actually got to the point where they were going over schedule so much that they had to move the production to Los Angeles so that way they could shoot this movie in between shoots of Columbo, which would never fly today with the way that contracts work. You wouldn't be able just to get your lead actor on one of the biggest shows on television to go make some cheap avant-garde fucking gangster movie in between shots. And I loved Peter Falk before this movie because I knew him from obviously Columbo. I don't trust people who don't like Columbo. He plays a really over-the-top character in Murder by Death, and I'd seen him on a lot of more comedy adjacent roles. But seeing the things that he was doing with Elaine May and John Cassavetes, and then Wings of Desire, just think that was later on in his career, obviously. But just seeing how good of an actor he truly was. Yeah. And everything from no one enters a room the way Peter Falk does. Yeah, and he's just so distinct. And again, you've got that glass eye, which just that wouldn't fly in Hollywood today, which is so sad. And he knows he has such he knows how he has such control over that glass eye, because there's definitely times where he's moving his eye in a completely different direction, knowing his eye won't to get reactions. Yeah, he's not hiding from the fact that he has a glass eye. Yeah, and yet you can still read every single emotion on his face.
And that's what some students were saying. They were just like, oh, that was kind of distracting. And others were just like, oh, no. I mean, because you're so conditioned, especially nowadays, you're so conditioned for actors to look a certain way, even if they are a little bit older. And even if they are playing older characters like these characters are, we're still expected to have at least somewhat of a particular presentation. So the fact that, they look like real people. And that is my favorite thing when watching a film, is that somebody looks like, oh, this looks like a real person. This doesn't look like an actor. And that's no shots fired to, because a lot of people who do look like quote unquote actors can deliver those performances. Yet at the same time, they don't look like the people that you know. And regardless of the fact that this is surrounding these people who are in the mafia or in the mob, they still look like real people. Peter Falk and John Cassavetes looks like somebody that you would see on the street.
And and just the way that John Cassavetes made himself look in this film, because
it's terrible.
I looked up that he just intentionally just made himself look as sickly as possible.
Mm-hmm.
This movie is just nothing but sweating and yelling and I imagine by the time that Mikey shows up in this film, Nicky had been wearing that fucking suit for a long time. I imagine he does not smell very good.
Yeah. Well, just even
there's just so much texture to this film and these characters. And
well, just even, right off the bat when he walks in and Nicky is just such a mess, and there is this almost kind of mother sensibility where Mikey is like, let the train come in, and he's trying to feed him the jelly sill. And he's just an absolute mess. And you're like, okay, I know the environment and the world that this film is inhabiting. And either right off the bat, you're with it or you're not. And you know right off the bat the film that you're getting into. And if you're not with it, you're really not going to be with it as the film gets deeper. Or even if you're going in expecting a traditional crime drama, you're not going to get it. And those expectations are going to be thwarted. And I think that can go for a lot of their films, both Elaine May's and Cassavetes, is that any expectations you have are definitely not going to be met. Or if they are met, they're going to be subverted and kind of given to you in a completely different way, which is why these films are so refreshing and why they hold up.
Yeah. And Elaine May, with only let's say 3 films, because by the time Ishtar came out, that was late 80s. But her first 3 films, she's running in the same circles as these mythologized movie brats, Coppola, Scorsese, Spielberg, all of them. And she's making just as interesting work, if not more interesting than some of them. Mm-hmm. And like I said, this was the last film she made in 9 years.
Yeah. I mean, even Heartbreak Kid, that was remade. And A New Leaf, that's hugely popular. And I know she performs in that film, and that was one of
my mom loves A New Leaf.
Oh, really?
She thinks Walter Matthau was the funniest fucking person in that movie.
Yeah, she seems like inside and out, performance and outside, is just such a kooky character. And I mean that in the best way possible. Of just the way she'd behave, the way things she'd say. Michael Hausman, who's the producer, was just saying how charming she was, and just how she was able to get everybody on board, just even in ways that she would frustrate them. She did it in such a charming way. One of the things Michael Hausman was talking about, he was like, okay, so the guys have to go from A to B. How do they get there? Is it going to be by train? Is it going to be by car? Is it going to be by boat? How do you want them to get from here to here? And she just goes, those all seem like great ideas. You'll figure it out. And then he's just like, okay. But again, that's that freedom that she's giving these people.
Yeah.
And that's why Cassavetes and Falk wanted to work with her. And that's why Falk wants to work with Cassavetes, is because he goes from this structured, especially, back then, television back then is not what television is today. So it's this opportunity to play in this new sandbox and to try something new. And that's why you watch Columbo, and then you go and watch a Cassavetes, you go and watch A Woman Under the Influence or Mikey and Nicky, and you're just like, oh my God, this is what Columbo's doing outside of the show. This is what Falk is doing. It's because, it gives them a chance to try something different. And that's why it certainly makes sense when you watch the Cassavetes directed films, and then you watch the films he acted in, and then someone tells you like, oh, he hated the movies that he acted in. It's like, oh, I can see that because these are nothing like the films that he wanted to make. And even in the films that he acts in of his own, which would be like Husbands, and he's got a small part in Minnie and Moskowitz, and Love Streams, especially kind of like being the big ones. They're just completely different performances. As opposed to, say something like his character in Dirty Dozen, or I don't know, I'd say Guy. I feel like you could pull him from Rosemary's Baby. I feel like you could put him into Cassavetes.
So, as I was preparing for this episode, I was listening to an interview with the film critic Richard Brody, who was talking about this film, and he had a really interesting like perspective on it. It was actually an interview with Richard Brody and film critic Carrie Rickey on the Criterion disc, and they were talking about how, so like I said, Elaine May is a writer director, but she has her start in acting and doing improv. And one reading they had on this film, so the whole movie's about like the overall story is about John Cassavetes' character Nicky stealing money from the mob. Essentially, we don't necessarily get details how, but we don't need it. Stealing money from the mob, and then because of that, they want him dead. And it's one reading that they had on this film that I thought was really interesting was that one could view this film as being, take the money aspect out of it and have it be about the mob is traditional theater actors and how these big Hollywood productions are taking their resources and stealing them away from them. And they made it even more on the nose with the fact that the two mob bosses are played by Sanford Meisner, who created the Meisner acting technique. And for those who haven't studied any sort of acting, Meisner's technique, the best way to describe it is that it focuses on more external inspiration, and you have to it's a lot more reacting to your fellow actors and everything around them. So it's very, improvisational based. You're not like, I think Stella Adler's style of acting was more so using internal feelings. Like, you're sad, so picture your dog dying or something. This was just using what you have around you and what other people are giving you to create a performance. And so they had him, and they had William Hickey, which he also played the uncle in Christmas Vacation, which I think is really funny. But William Hickey, he was also an acting teacher who studied under I think he also started under Meisner. Well, regardless, they have these two big time acting teachers playing the mob bosses, and then you have these two actors who are very much indebted to their style of acting, who are constantly taking these big Hollywood jobs and being pulled from the passion projects that they'd much rather be doing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not dissimilar from, say, like, it always confuses me when, and this could be a good comp, is when like people are like, oh, did you hear so-and-so is going to direct this Marvel movie? It's like, yeah, but you don't see any of their voice. You don't see any of their singularity that made them special. That is what actually got them that job, because then they just get put through this machine and they become Marvelized. And that's similar to like when you see Cassavetes in the films that he just acts in, you're just like, oh, these are nothing like the films that I know he wants to make, that he has been very vocal about wanting to make, but he can't because studios don't want to make those films. And when they do make those films inside the studio system, they run into problems. And yeah, that's a tale as old as time. I mean, they even talked about in this film how they would run into so many problems because of the fact that it was made under the guise of a studio, as opposed to getting to do it on their own time and then hopefully having to sell that, or getting to sell it later.
So one thing I wanted to ask you, since you've produced 3 feature films at this point, correct?
Yeah.
Thinking from the perspective of a producer, what kind of challenges do you think Elaine May might have run into trying to get this film made, especially on a studio's dime?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big
This is a big heady question, so there's no right or wrong answer to it.
Well, yeah, just in going back to what one of the things that we've been championing about this film, and one of the things that we love about this film, is that it's about characters and that it is light on plot. And I think that, I don't know too much about the reception from your typical movie-going audience at the time, but I could certainly see, and I witnessed this amongst my students, is that you have a certain expectation when going into a film that is about, just even in the most broadest sense of the log line, someone screws over the mob and now they're after him. We've seen that story a billion times, and you're going to have certain expectations of that story. So when you go in and you get what is Mikey and Nicky, I could certainly see how if you had the traditional expectations of a mob type movie that I just described, you're going to be disappointed. But if you go in expecting what you would think you'd get from somebody like Elaine May, John Cassavetes, and Peter Falk, you're going to be very, very excited and pleased by that. So, and your question is that, yeah, they're making these films that they want to make inside the studio, which just don't work. And that's why they run into these problems. And the fact that, especially with someone like Elaine May and the way that she shoots, which is very similar to Cassavetes, is that she never pressured anyone to be ready when they weren't ready. And that's one of the things I really love about her. And that's why she got the performances that she got. And she was able to make the film that she made, is because she took her time. And you can't do that on a studio movie. And even in independent films, you just don't have time. I don't know if it was just, I don't care. I'm servicing the story, which is, I mean, it's indicative in the fact that they shot over 1 million feet of film. And I think it said,
I can't believe the studio didn't because that's a lot of money. I'm surprised on
film.
I'm surprised the studio didn't try to pull her as a director or something, because if I don't know, I feel like the head of Paramount, if they heard that a relatively unproven director, because let's be real, even though she directed 2 films before this, she's a woman in Hollywood in the 1970s. She's an unproven director in that way, unfortunately. Relatively unproven director is shooting 1 million feet of fucking film on their dime, where with 2 improvisational actors, and they're going over time so significantly they have to move production back to LA so Peter Falk can continue his obligations to Colombo.
Yeah.
The fact that this movie turned out the way that she wanted it to, and they didn't just fucking fire her and go get Scorsese or someone to come in and finish it, is mind-blowing.
Also, it just speaks to their talent, the fact that they pulled it off, because there's so many ways that this could have gone wrong. And the fact that, and that's one of the reasons among many that I do love her, and I love that this film is that, and I love Cassavetes as well, is they always stuck to their guns. They weren't going to make, even inside the studio, and that's a whole other can of worms in terms of, being hired. What's the difference between being hired and are you supposed to service the studio and what they want versus your own vision? And yeah, like I said, that's a whole other can of worms. But in regards to this film, the fact that, and there's some great stories about how when she was editing the film, the studio had said to her, they're like, enough is enough. We need to see this film. And they had said to her, okay. And she was like, all right, you can come see the film at, blah, 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 wherever tomorrow. And she was like, I can't remember the exact details, but Michael Hausman was saying that they showed up and they're like, okay, well, we need to watch it at 10 a.m., not 2 p.m. And so she was like, okay. So the third reel wasn't ready. And she was like, well, if you would have watched it at 2 p.m., it would have been ready. So just this way of her kind of messing with them is really funny to me. And he was saying even one of the reels didn't have sound or even a track to it. So she would act it out and she would say the dialogue out loud. It just is almost this way of just kind of gaslighting the producers or not producers, but the studio heads is just so funny to me. Cause you almost get the sense that she knows their frustration, obviously, and she knows how, but rather than trying to subdue them and make and ease the situation, she's just making it probably worse. But that's why, she's a comedian,
Yeah.
But yeah, that to my point and to what you were saying about the producer question is just, you can't put someone like Elaine May, especially when she comes as a package deal with Cassavetes and Falk into making a film like this inside of a studio. Is just the fact that it turned out as well as it did is extraordinary. And I'm so surprised that there wasn't more tinkering to the film and there weren't more reshoots because there aren't. I mean, granted, she shot over 1 million feet of film, so the question of reshoot shouldn't even be a question because you have enough footage to call probably 35 different movies out of that. But there wasn't that talk to say, okay, make it more, and maybe there was, and we just don't know about that. But just in my research of like to make it more mainstream, and I love it for that, and I love her for that, and I love the film for what it is, and I love how rough around the edges it is. And Victor Kemper was a cinematographer on this, so he had done stuff at this point like Dog Day Afternoon and The Gambler, and he had actually directed Husbands, which was the Cassavetes film with Peter Falk. And there's some other funny stories about that, how Victor Kemper left halfway through because he was so frustrated with the way the production was working. And by no means was a smooth shoot, and it was chaos. But all shoots are chaos, especially when you're shooting an indie-like film.
Yeah,
and the studio.
And like the editing process for this film had to have just been its own level of chaos, to the point where I believe there's 2 credited editors on this film, John Carter and Sheldon Kahn. Because like you said, there's so much footage that you could call 35 different movies out of this. And and the job of an editor is, I always view editing as it's writing the third draft of the script. Because you write one draft, you shoot a different draft, and then you find a third draft while editing. And some directors keep everything completely to book, and you just essentially have to just go through the script and find the best moments and put it together. So on and so forth. Like Tommy Lee Wallace, the editor of Halloween, said the original Halloween was the easiest movie he's ever had to cut because John did it all for him on set. Then you have something like this, where, like you said, a film magazine, you maybe got like 10, 15 minutes worth of footage at a time. And, first 6 minutes they're doing the script, and then they're improvising. And that's probably where some of the best stuff is coming from. So then it's like, okay, here's what we have. We are going in different directions. How I really like this. How can we tie this in? And then it's a Herculean task. Like just to sit through and watch all those dailies.
Yeah, it's as a filmmaker too. When looking at it from a filmmaker's perspective, it's mind blowing because this type of filmmaking and this style and these performances were obviously very influential to the mumblecore movement that took off around 2005, and which were a string of films that were essentially focusing on interpersonal dynamics and relationships and foregoing the plot-like structure. Again, very similar to the Cassavetes work. But one of the reasons, if not the main reason, that movement took off was because filmmakers were able to do it cheap, and they were able to do it digitally. So you can shoot for as long as you want. So you get these takes that just go on and on. To do that on film, and that's why you have these stories like where the magazine runs out, and then Elaine May is like, just keep going, just keep going. I would be so interested to hear all of their perspectives on digital and how they would either embrace that, because I think it would go either way. I think they would maybe embrace that. And I can't imagine a Cassavetes or Elaine May film like this film shot digitally, and then how different that not necessarily would aesthetically look, but just how it would change the overall vibe and tone of the film, because you could have even more to call from. Who knows, maybe they would be resistant to that. And you do hear a lot of filmmakers state that like there is magic in that time restraint. And who knows, maybe a lot of the magic in these films is because of that time restraint, and they were able to just find that kind of lightning in a bottle in these small takes. Would that be lost if they were able to shoot infinite amount of takes and shoot digitally? I don't know. But I think that's one of the fun things we can kind of examine and try to break down. And we'll never know their opinion, because unfortunately 2 out of 3 of them are dead.
And you mentioned the mumblecore movement. That's like spot on. It's like this Joe Swanberg has a career because of movies like this.
Yeah.
You know, and like you look at something like his film Drinking Buddies, where there was no script.
Mm-hmm.
Every day he would just give them little notes in terms of here's what we need to accomplish in this scene, and just let the actors find it.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, I didn't shoot a lot on film, but we both went to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and you can't even touch a digital camera, at least back then, until you completed your portfolio.
Right.
And you know, the rolls of film that we had, I think you could only get 6 minutes out of one of those. Maybe close to 3.
The Tri-X reversal, those were 100 feet, so we got about 3 minutes, depending on how good you were at threading it. But you'd only get about 3 minutes on that 100 feet. And again, also. And
that was about $25 a pop for 3 minutes of film.
Yeah, exactly. So if you just got back essentially what was Black Leader, that was always a huge disappointment.
Yeah, I definitely had those. I actually had a film professor who was way too nice. I don't remember Ken Wood. I had all of my footage was either overexposed or underexposed. He was such a nice guy. At one point, he's like, the couple shots that I can see here are really well composed. He's way too nice. But there is a certain magic and almost fear of like, because when the camera's running through, when the film is running through the camera, you can hear it, and it's every second is money being thrown away. And then you can also hear it when it's starting to run out. Yeah. And if you're not, granted, 10 minutes is definitely a lot better than 3. But when you can start hearing that getting to the end, and you still have a little more of this scene to get through, then you have to really start committing to trying to get through it or do what you have to do. And I was actually a little sentimental about when I first shot on a DSLR. In the early days of DSLR, with the way that flash memory worked, you could only shoot about 10 minutes a take anyways. So there was a little bit of sentimentalness about the time limit. But I personally believe that if Cassavetes was still alive, he'd still be out there trying to remortgage his house, and he'd probably be he probably would have been that guy with a VHS camera still trying to make shit. If he couldn't have shot on film, I feel like Cassavetes just wanted to make stuff so much that it doesn't matter what he shot on as long as he could shoot it.
And who knows what his viewpoint would be.
We don't know, because like none of his films are like, he's never been that visually stunning filmmaker in terms of the way his movies look. I like the way his movies look, but that's not what people are writing about when it comes to his films. I think I always felt the substance was more important than anything else for him.
Yeah, and I've written about that in my notes of this film, is that even at that, it feels very much like it's not drawing attention to the cinematography of the film. There aren't no sweeping crane shots. Everything is either locked down on a tripod, and when stuff is moving, it's either handheld, or if it does look like it might be on a track, it's not calling attention to itself. And again, that goes to the point of just like, that's not what is important to them. And he even used to say, and even in this film, there are a lot of moments that are out of focus, or someone just like that graveyard scene. There's so many moments where they just fall completely into black, just because they didn't have the proper setup, or if they did and they stepped out of the light, they would often say, if it goes soft, in regards to the focus, if it goes soft, but I like it, I'm still going to use it. And I love that. It was all
I've done that while cutting my own films. I'll look at a shot and people tell me, well, that's out of focus, that doesn't look the best. But there's something about it.
Yeah.
It works.
Yeah. And especially if the actor is delivering something so specific and delivering something that resonates with you, it's impossible not to keep it in there because of that emotional weight that it holds. And that's why these films work, is because of those moments where, there's so many shots in this film that are a little bit soft, and maybe it looks, I have one of the older DVDs, so I'm sure it looks a lot better on the Criterion Blu-ray. But even at that, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that you can certainly tell isn't sharp, so to speak. And like we were saying, the graveyard scene. And that doesn't matter to me. Like, yeah, if that happens in something like, maybe a much more technically proficient movie where the cinematography is one of the drawing points, yeah, you're going to notice that. But when it is very much like built into the film itself, I think not only is that something that's accepted, for me, it's like celebrated. And you can't do that with every film, right? Like there's a lot of films where if they applied that same thing, it just wouldn't work. But it works in this type of film, and this works in a lot of in all those types of films that they made, whether it be Husbands or say A Woman in the Influence or Faces or what have it. And that's why it's Eyes, because you were talking about Ishtar earlier. It's like you watch this and you're like, okay, yeah, let's go to our next film, and then you're like, this is the film she made after Mikey and Nicky.
Yeah, and like, don't get me wrong, I personally like Ishtar,
right?
But it's a very different beast of a movie.
Yeah. That's what I was referring to. I wasn't referring to necessarily the quality, but more so just the overall vibe, the overall look of the film. It's just, and that's why more so what I'm referring to. And when I say like just that influence of Cassavetes and that type of filmmaking, you can see in Mikey and Nicky, it's just so apparent. That influence that they all have over the film itself. And I love it because this was pretty far into his filmography as well. This was the same year that Killing of a Chinese Bookie came out. So he was very much established as, he literally invented independent filmmaking. Like he is the first, if not one of the first independent filmmakers.
Yeah.
So he already at that time had been financing his own stuff and had already made like Woman of Influence, Mini, Husbands, Faces, and stuff before that, like his studio stuff. So it was very much part of the kind of filmmaking zeitgeist. Who wouldn't want to play in that? But I can certainly see how a lot of people would be resistant to that. So to embrace that, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I think it's definitely one of my favorite films of all time.
And it's a movie that like I watched it last week to prepare for this because I like to do a little research before I talk about anything. And I've gone back and rewatched scenes from it multiple times. I was just on lunch yesterday, like at work, and I work in healthcare, and I was by myself in a room, and I just put up my headphones and I rewatched that scene with him fighting in the street. And what I loved about that scene is like that scene is choreographed like it's two people making love. Yeah.
Well, and so scrappy too. It doesn't feel.
It's like not a pretty movie fight. It's they both kind of have each other in a headlock and they fall to the ground, and it's like I said, it's two people falling out of love with each other.
Yeah. And my favorite moment in that scene is because it happened, or at least you can assume that it happened on accident, is when he slips.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's real. It's real, and it's the moments like that.
And there was one of those near the beginning of the movie after Mikey got the cream, and he's running back through the hallways of that shitty motel, and he nearly slips too. Yeah, and I love that because I'm sure with how much they shot, I'm sure there's multiple takes of him not slipping. But I love that that's the take that she uses because that's real. That's realism. Now, before I ask you what your Thrill House moment is, which is a Simpsons reference if you didn't get it, I wanted to talk a little bit about the ending before we wrapped up and just how sobering that ending was. Like it was one thing because like through this entire movie, we're following this really kind of shitty hitman played by Ned Beatty. And he seems so incompetent. Like that you just at a certain point just think that he's not going to be able to accomplish this. There's nothing to fear of him. He's almost like a Coen Brothers character in that, where I'm not afraid of this character, but the fear that Nicky is giving out makes him into a scary character. And then coupled with just that agonizing moment of Mikey pushing up all the chairs against the door so Nicky can't get in as his wife watches on. I just stared up at the ceiling for like 5 minutes after that scene.
Yeah. I think what really makes that scene work so well though is what happens before that. And it's one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie. It's between Mikey and Annie, his wife. It feels so genuine because everything that he and Nicky had talked about prior is obviously still sitting with him. And he confides in,
I think he even asked her, he's like, do I repeat myself?
Yeah, I love that moment. That's one of my favorite.
Too. I love it.
It's just because that was such a passing moment earlier in the film, but you can see how that got in his head, and you can see the effect that Nicky has on him. And that's what happens. Like, your friend says something to you, you go home and you're like, holy shit, do I really do that? Or someone, or whoever might say, like a loved one, a family member, whatever, but it's that same effect. And that's what that kind of callback is insinuating.
And that scene, like you said, between them talking as the sun is slowly coming up and they're just sitting there in the dark.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. And just like and I also love the character of his wife, because I assume she knows what he does for a living, but there's never, like, you see the way that Nicky and his wife are.
Yes.
Compared to the way that Mikey and his wife are.
Yes.
And there's a mutual respect and understanding between the two of them. And they're just two people that feel like they're truly comfortable with each other.
Yeah, it's very genuine. And one of the reasons why I really love that scene is why it feels like a breath of fresh air, which is so ironic because it comes before the most gut-wrenching scene of the film, and because it comes after so many scenes in which we're just assaulted with, the language and the bombastic nature of these two characters, and just how vocal they are, how loud they are. One thing is the only criticism, and this is just my own personal thing with not only this film, but a lot of Cassavetes' work, is just all of his movies are so loud. People are constantly screaming. And he was a very, very flamboyant character. He was extremely boisterous. He was very loud. Even if you watch some of these behind the scenes, they're amazing because he has so much energy. And that energy is infused into these films, which come across in these characters, because these characters are obviously extensions of themselves in a lot of ways, which is why you get so much of that honesty. Point being is that scene with Mikey and Annie, it's so quiet and he's just talking to her. It's even lower than room tone, and she's just listening to him and she's asking him questions. Like, so much of Mikey and Nicky's conversation is about them waiting for their turn to talk or combating one another. But Annie, when she's asking him these questions, and she's just there for him. Right. And that isn't something that we've gotten at all at any point up to this movie, is anybody being quote unquote there for somebody. And you could say, oh, well, what are you talking about? Mikey's there for Nicky the whole time. It's like, yeah, but it's only to set him up. And that's what's so tragic about this movie, is that when they are having these genuine moments, and why the film works in terms of giving us that information that he set him up 20 minutes in the movie, as opposed to in the last act, is that all these sincere conversations that they have. And, we were talking about where he's like, if anything happens to me, Mikey did. We already know that, and we know all those things. So they don't come as a gut punch towards the end. They come as a slap at the face as we're hearing them, because we know what this is all going to lead to, or at least you have a good sense of where this film is going. But for it to be filled with all this rich history, and then for all of that to kind of come to a head between Mikey and Annie is just, that's amazing writing. And then for it to be in directing and for it to be pulled off in those performances is great, because then, it gets extremely loud again. And the fact that Nicky dies knowing that Mikey set him up is just, I think it's not necessarily, to me, at that last shot of Falk kind of staring over the couch when he knows Nicky is dead. I don't think it's necessarily that he's dead. I think it's that he realized that Mikey knows. And that's why I think that's a callback to earlier when he says, if anything happens to me, Mikey did. He says, you son of a bitch, you take that back. Because he doesn't want him to know. I don't think it's necessarily that he's like, oh, I'm scared that he's going to find out, or that he might run away. It's more so the weight of being like, oh, I don't want this person that was obviously formerly my best friend to know that I set them up. I can live with him dying. I can't live with him knowing that I set him up.
Yeah. And because I truly believe Nicky did not know. He wasn't aware at any point throughout this movie. Even at the beginning when he's accusing him, that was more so paranoia.
Yeah.
than him actually, because I feel like throughout this entire movie, Nicky was like, Mikey's the only person I can trust. Mikey's the last person who would do this to me.
Yeah, and that's actually going to lead into my Thrill House moment when we get to it. But yeah, the ending itself is just, I don't think you can top that. I don't think there's any better way to have ended.
No, that is the only way this movie could have ended.
Yeah, and the fact that there's no music at the end, it just fades out, and then you just hear the traffic and a little bit of that radio music. It's like this weird kind of like recurring tune that plays it. But it just sounds like almost like elevator music. It just plays over the end credits. It's just beautiful. But in terms of that Thrill House moment, getting back to, or in reference to what you were just saying, it's also what I find as the most heartbreaking moment of the film. And it's when Mikey says to Nicky, after they've gotten in one of many of their spats, he says, "I got a terrific suggestion for you, Nick. I suggest you find somebody you can trust." And for me, why that is my quote unquote like Thrill House, and it seems like kind of like a passing moment, like, oh, most people probably wouldn't even remember that. Why that's so important and speaks volumes to me is that to Nicky, it feels like it might just seem like Mikey feels underappreciated because he has been there for him and he has been the person that he can trust. And it almost feels like to Nicky that maybe he's just insinuating that, saying like, hey, I'm the only one that is here for you. So the fact that you don't trust me, you're going to need to find somebody that you can trust. But, and this is also rings true in terms, or that it has that emotional resonance in the moment, because that, again, that fact that we know that he's setting him up. It would be much more of a second viewing thing if you found that out in the last act and then kind of going back and re-examining things he says and being like, oh, okay, cool. You know, it's like a twist in a movie. Like you go back and you're like, oh, okay, cool. Now that I know what the twist is, I see everything that's leading up to it. But when Mikey says that, I think from his perspective, it's actually very sincere because of the fact that we know Mikey has betrayed Nicky. He's oh man, it's so hard to even like think about it. It's almost as if he's saying, you can't even trust me, so therefore you need to find somebody that you can trust. And to hear that, and for basically Nicky to realize that at the end is what's so tragic about it. And truthfully, I don't think, you know, in kind of the next film that I'm making is actually very much about friendship, and it's about like loyalty in a friendship. And this film is, in a weird way, an influence. It is a horror film, but I don't think we see a lot of films about friendship. And I think this is one of the films that does it that well, because for films that are about friendship to go this deep, you definitely don't see a lot of it. No,
for me, so there's probably a couple moments that I could cite as being my Thrill House moment, even something as early on as the scene of Mickey roughing up the coffee shop clerk. But for me, the scene that just really sticks out to me is right after they have their spat in the street, and it's the closest thing that Mikey has ever done to like admitting what's going on, when he says, "I just can't do this anymore."
Yeah.
And he's like, "What do you mean?" You know, I don't think this is working anymore. I don't remember his exact words, but he essentially said, you know, this friendship's not working. Mm-hmm. And Nicky just can't let it go. He's like, fine, then I'll be your friend. Mm-hmm. And I've been in situations like that where you're struggling to cut someone out of your life because you do have good memories with them and they're just not getting it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that leads in what's so beautiful about that fight isn't a result of male machismo or someone screwing over the other. It's because he's trying to get away from him because he doesn't want to be his friend. And the reason they get in that fight is because Nicky keeps stopping him because he doesn't want to be left. So, you know, the reason it gets physical is because he keeps pushing him or he keeps grabbing him. Not because of what he said, but because he's trying to leave him and he doesn't want to be left. He doesn't want to be alone. And so I think, that speaks to exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. So that would definitely be my Thrill House moment. So any final thoughts on Mikey and Nicky before we wrap up?
I just think, yeah, it's an incredible character study. It's definitely one of the films that makes you reflect on your own life and the relationships that you have with other people. And, I talk a lot about this, and we examine a lot of this in my classes. We always talk about the idea of watching a movie for an escape and watching a movie in which you're confronted with reality. And this is certainly the latter. And while there is definitely value in films that you go to for an escape and kind of check out of your own head, I love films in which it requires self-reflection. And there's so much of this film that requires you to think about relationships and think about friendships, and that essentially let you reflect on your own relationships and your own friendships. And, again, that's what's so beautiful about this film is that, yeah, none of us have ties to the mafia. We're probably never going to be in a situation, hopefully, where, we're dealing with the death of a friend at our own hands, but everything else is what's important about this film. And that's the relationship and the characters and what they're going through. And the fact that regardless of the fact that we don't resonate with the mafia element, we resonate with the characters because they, even though we aren't in their line of work, they're still going through everything that we go through. They're still going through the exact same arguments. And that's what another great thing is, that they're never talking about the job. They're never talking about work or you did this. I mean, there's a few small conversations, but like the graveyard scene, which is usually the standout scene, it's all the heavy stuff. It's all about, the conversations that we have, like what happens when you die, what happens, I wish, this person was still around. You remember when this person died, he's talking about his brother, which, I mean, that's a whole other scene that's just like so gut wrenching, is when Mikey's talking about how he lost his brother, and, that's had such a profound effect on his life, and that he can't let it go. And obviously that leads to that conversation with Annie towards the end. Sorry, I'm rambling, but
no, it's okay. This has been a great conversation. So if you've not seen Mikey and Nicky, anyone listening to this, it's currently, at the time of recording this, streaming on the Criterion channel, which is definitely worth your time to subscribe to. I think I'm not being paid by either of them, but I think Criterion channel and Shudder are two of the most interesting streaming services around right now.
Mm-hmm.
Also
pretty different from each other, but still.
But also, like, that kind of sums up my taste in film, both of those places right there. And then obviously, if you are inclined to purchase physical media, pick up that Criterion edition. At the time of recording, this is a Criterion sale, but by the time this comes out, I don't think that'll be going on anymore. So tell before we let you go, Drew, is there anything that you're currently working on that you want to tell people about?
Yeah, I'm working on our next feature. It's called Fly Trapper. We're going to shoot that next summer, and then hopefully that will be out within the following year. And it's about two friends and kind of they're struggling with a falling out that they had with one another, and how that's affecting their past and how that's affecting their present, and trying to rekindle that friendship, all under the guise of a horror film. If you're interested in the last film I made, They Want Me Gone, that came out and then was released last fall. So you can find that on Amazon, iTunes, any of the streaming services or services where you would rent films.
Perfect. And then your other film, I thought you had another film too. When the King Tilts, is that available anywhere?
No, that one was, it was definitely one of those early features where you kind of go back and you're like,
fair enough. Oh, yeah. Well, if you need any help with the new one, you know where to find me. Yeah. Thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. This was a great conversation. And honestly, like, I just watched the movie like last week and I want to watch it again already just after having this conversation.
You should. Yeah. Well, I just want to say thanks for having me on. I always love hanging out with you, always having our conversations, especially talking about 4Ks, because you were one of the people that got me into that. And so I was very happy to hop on the 4K train. And I definitely don't regret it. And
well, next time I'm in the Illinois area, I'll have to come over and help calibrate your television to make them look even better.
Oh, hey, trust me. The first night the TV came in, I was like, all right, I'm going to watch a movie tonight. I got about 3 minutes in before I started tinkering. And then I would honestly say, and obviously, and I'm sure you have this too, all the settings written down on your.
Oh yeah, I've got pictures. I have 3 different settings for, since this is all just annoying TV talk, but I have an OLED television, so I have different settings for bright room, less bright room, completely dark, and everything. So yes.
Oh yeah, yeah. It took me, I would say, and I'm always tinkering, but I would say before I was like comfortable watching a movie, I'd say it took 3 weeks.
Yeah, and I'm still making tweaks too, and like if it's progressively getting darker in the room, and like I'll pause the movie and just change to my optimal settings for each time.
Or here's a good question: do you have any of your standout 4Ks that you're like, this is my favorite? Even it might not be your favorite movie of all your collection, but you're like, this is the best like 4K example.
Honestly, one of the ones that truly blew me away and definitely helped in my enjoyment of the film, Vertigo is one of the best looking 4Ks I've ever seen.
Oh, I'm sure that looks gorgeous. Yeah. Well, that was shot Technicolor too, wasn't it?
Yes, it was shot Technicolor. It's just phenomenal looking. And if you are an audio nerd like myself and you are capable, it is one of the few DTS X soundtracks.
Okay.
Meaning that's DTS's version of Atmos. They did an upscale of it, which is actually pretty great, considering that movie, when it was originally released in its 70 millimeter format, actually had a 6-track surround sound back in the 60s. Cool. So they extracted all those elements to do something really interesting with the sound design in that film.
Cool.
And then honestly, there's a lot of good looking new films. Like you can't go wrong with a lot of them, but Nicholas Winding referenced Drive in 4K. They did Second Sight Films out of the UK just did a nice big 4K box set of it that they actually went back. They actually got the original colorist and went back to the original coloring house and did the Dolby Vision color grade on it. Oh, cool. And it looks incredible.
Cool. That's great. That's amazing. I'll definitely check those out. I'm sure you're already aware of this, but one of my favorite types of films to watch on 4K are the Italian horror films of the 80s and 70s.
Oh, the colors of those are just incredible.
I got Suspiria on 4K, and it's absolutely extraordinary. And then I picked up Lucio Fulci's Zombie, which looks amazing. And also, I'm really excited because Grindhouse is releasing the Beyond, the Lucio Fulci movie, on 4K. Ooh. And City of the Living Dead, I know, comes out next month. So I'm really, really excited. But yeah, specifically those Italian horror films look absolutely extraordinary.
And if you are, because I follow a lot of different pages where they talk about 4Ks, and people have the wrong idea of what a 4K disc is supposed to look like. They think a 4K disc is going to make it look like a new movie. Yeah. No, if you love the look of film,
right,
4K is how you're going to get it. Like
it's funny you bring
the way that grain is reproduced in 4K is just gorgeous.
Yeah, and that was my big concern. And I got another friend who was really into 4K, and I was like, my concern is that like I don't want to watch these old films, like these Italian films or what have you, and it'd be too glossy. And just in doing research, I know, yes, you can't technically compare analog and digital and whatnot, but they say the equivalent of 35 millimeter would be 4K. So technically, when you watch a 4K film, you're getting the closest representation of what that film would the celluloid itself would actually look like.
And then like companies like Vinegar Syndrome are actually putting like out 16 millimeter films in 4K. Mm-hmm. And yes, technically there's not enough information on a 16 millimeter film print to make that worthwhile. However, they're able to just extract every single fucking detail out of those prints. And like I said, if you just the fact that like I can watch some older films in 4K and see the light halations, like as a cinema nerd, is just phenomenal.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring that up too, because I was confused about that, because I remember The Hills Have Eyes came out in 4K. I was like, what's the point? The movie was shot in 16 millimeter. But it looked extraordinary compared to just what the traditional HD version was. But yeah, I would highly recommend anybody to check it. It's like watching the movie. Like even people I've shown it to, who just like don't necessarily not have appreciation, but just don't pay attention to those things. I've shown them some of the movies at my place, and they're just like, this looks unbelievable.
Yep. And like that's kind of the reaction I've had from people since, like I said, I have an OLED television, and one of the big selling points of an OLED television is it has a perfect contrast ratio. Because say you're watching a movie in like ultra widescreen, where you have the black bars on top and bottom, anything that's perfect black on an OLED turns off. Wow. So I also painted my room black.
Cool.
My living room. So if I'm watching a movie, say like Vertigo, where it's in widescreen, those black bars blend into my television, and it's just screen. And then since with my speakers and everything, it's just you're enveloped in sound. So one of these days you'll have to make the trip up, and come watch a movie at my place.
I am so into that.
All right. Now that we've bored everyone, once again, thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And let's get together soon and talk some more.
Yeah, it was so great hearing from you and talking to you and getting to hang out again. And we'll do it again.
Perfect. And then an extra special thanks to fellow podcaster and friend of the show, Austin Proctor, who actually had edited this episode. So if you want to support Austin Proctor and everything he does, be sure to check out the Frightmares podcast. I am a occasional co-host on that show, but he does one of my favorite podcasts about the horror genre, and it should be one of your favorite podcasts too. So thanks a lot for Austin Proctor for editing this episode.
The Shameless Picture Show is recorded in Milwaukee, Wisconsin and Easton, Maryland, and is hosted and produced by Nick Richards and Michael Viers. Today's episode was edited by Michael Viers. Our opening theme music was written especially for us by The Directionals, with narration by Zach McClain. The end credit music you're enjoying at the moment was generously provided by my friends in the band 10 Speed. The Shameless graphic design is masterfully done by Amanda Viers. An extra special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters and to our generous sponsors. We are on Spotify, Stitcher Radio, iTunes, Google Play, and Libsyn. You can find links for all these amazing people in the description below.